first part of the meeting is our board workshop, so I will turn that over to you, Chris.
And we have a number of folks here today to discuss water quality. And water quality is obviously an integral part of pond standards. And we recently received the water quality results that are taken on a regular basis by Octogenics throughout the system. And what we wanted to do is I'll be here to present some of that water quality data, what that data shows us, problems, solutions, and we have staff from Octogenics here today to discuss their concerns with water quality and other solutions they could offer. And like any workshop, just general discussion with the board, open discussion, question and answers, and with that I'll introduce Elle and let her get the program started.
Good afternoon. Ernesto de la Vega will be here. He is just running just a few minutes behind. He is also going to talk about our water quality. I have I handed out a spreadsheet to all of the supervisors. I'm going to pull it up on the screen. This shows the water quality sample results from 3 years from Aquagenics. They take theirs to Sanders Lab, and I've just included this last few months that we have been taking ours to Lee County Pond Watch. You see the red numbers. The red numbers are high. Those are excessive over what they should be normally. I also included a little handout about the water quality report and what it means. You can see from the all the red on your chart there, we have an issue with phosphorus. Phosphorus is generally a nutrient found in fertilizers and naturally in Florida soils. Phosphorus is one of the nutrients combined with nitrogen and nitrates that cause our algae blooms. So basically what this is showing me is that somehow we need to cut back on our fertilizer use or install more control measures to help reduce or mitigate these extra high nutrient levels. Chlorophyll is another one you'll see that's fairly high in several of the testing sites. Chlorophyll is an indication of algae that is present in the water. Do I have any questions?
Elle, you might indicate that the red numbers that indicate excess are explained on that third page where it shows the range of average range and numbers that are in excess of the average.
Right, well,
I
the
think that's
average
the
range,
basis.
the average range is also on the spreadsheet. I give you my basin number or the water body that the sample came out of. Second column is the average range for what you should have for that nutrient in the water body. And then the following columns are results from water samples taken either in 2017, 2018, and 2019.
And then the other thing is that it is somewhat misleading, as I believe these are all grab samples.
These are all what?
Grab samples.
They are grab
Yeah,
samples.
so did I.
They are grab samples.
They're grab samples, not composite samples.
That's correct. So this is the representation of the water body on the date the water sample was taken, which is generally the second Monday of each month. So you could go back out there in 2 weeks and get a different reading, absolutely. Depending on how much rain and other things.
You know, I've seen some scattergrams in my day, but this is maybe one of the top 10 that I've ever seen with numbers just all over the place.
That's what happens when you do grabs.
What's that?
That's what happens when you do grabs. Grab samples, that can
I
happen.
heard you, but I heard your words, but they don't mean anything.
It was a G, not a C.
I understand that too. Why would we have a little more uniformity than we
Money.
have here?
Money to go out and do the sampling. If we had more money to do the sampling, you could get a composite sample and shrink some of this stuff up. But as Al said, when you go do a grab sample, it just depends totally on what the conditions were at the point in time of where you took the sample.
How do you make any kind of a decision about how you remediate things when you've got numbers like this?
Because more than anything, it identifies a problem, a potential problem. So, and I totally agree with what Al is saying. It identifies that phosphorus and chlorophyll, while it may not be exact as far as the degree of significance, it is a significant problem. It's an issue.
Madam. And so if I understand correctly, really the phosphorus is, actually, the chlorophyll is a byproduct of increased levels of phosphorus, right? Is that-
Yes, the algae.
Yeah, that's an algae indicator.
Mhm.
Okay. And we're gonna talk about what mitigation we're doing today, if any?
No, I just wanted to present the information to you so that you have this, and, there are things you can do. You can add, it's such a sore subject, I hate to even say it out loud. Plants and trees help to use up nutrients. Aeration is also a way to help reduce some of the levels of nitrogen, nitrates in the water body. There are several things that can be done, and the point of these numbers is to watch them over a time period and have your baseline sample results, so that if all of a sudden you start seeing everything is jumping off the charts, you've got a big problem at that point. So you want to watch this as you take it year by year, month by month, and keep an eye on these things. There's months, certain months of the year that you expect it to be high. We have a fertilizer blackout period. It ends in September. If you get rain in October, I expect October to be high in nutrients. Why? Because you got fertilizer runoff.
Because people start fertilizing.
That's
That was my
right.
question.
I can fertilize again, and it's not residents only. I am talking all landscape companies do this. They have to abide by the ordinance. So that's called the first flush. First time it rains, after the blackout period ends, you have a rise in nutrient levels, phosphorus and nitrogen in particular, which will also lead to higher ammonia and higher chlorophyll.
And Al, just a question, just because I don't know, is there also contributors with pesticides versus fertilizers?
Pesticides would show up in a different form. They could show up as part of the ammonia.
Okay.
And if I'm mistaken, we have Mr. Ernesto, who is our water quality guru. He helps me out so much. So if he would like to come up and expand on what I have just said.
Mr. Tinkle, did you have a
Yeah,
question?
just one thing that has to be a little concerned, and again, it could be because of the grab samples, is the Pelican, which is downstream, would be where 1, 2, 3. They've been aerating, and they've been aerating for a long time. So I would expect a cleaner sample in the flowway once I got into Pelican Reserve, because you've got aeration and a lot of other things that have been done there, including the littorals. It may be, don't want to go down the road too far, it could be that we are polluting it so much from Gateway that the impact of the cleaner water in Pelican isn't making a difference. There's not enough data to show that. The one concern I've got, and it could be again the grad sample, is the chlorophyll in the months of August and October in Weir 1, which is right down below Pelican Reserve, which absolutely makes no sense at all. But again, that's what you get when you do grab samples. You can get wildcat things like this, but across the board, I was really hoping to see a significant drop off in water quality, or an improvement, I should say, in water quality going downstream, because we pick up all of the volume of Pelican Reserve, which is treated as about as good as you can get. You have essentially 100% littoral around the ponds, and you have aeration in all the ponds. It may be that just simply the water volume from Pelican is not great enough to offset the water volume coming from Gateway. Could be, don't know.
Just so I can clarify, that 205.90 reading right there was
Yes.
was taken in flowway 1 just before it goes under 75. The only one that I have right now, I was not able to get out to Lake 132 for several months due to summer rains. It was wet. The only one I have from the slough is where I have Area 9 weir. Okay, these others are literally from flowway number 1, if that helps you, Ed. And that makes a lot more sense, because as it came down flowway 1 at 205, by the time we got to the weir, it was down to 57.
If we do this again, the only thing I'd like to add in, well, I don't even know if we have the date. Well, yeah, we do get the new machines, the weirs and the monitors, is to put in the average daily flow so that we see the water as it goes down from 5, which may be 15, 20 CFS, all the way down to 300 or 400 CFS when we get to 1, to see if volume has any impact on this. That'd be the only thing I'd
It
say.
surely does.
Well, you
Okay.
you can make a lot of assumptions based on the broadness of the data pool, but I think the point is, it's an indicator if there is a problem.
What the other thing is that we are on a basin, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're on a basin that does not have any TMDLs.
Correct.
So
And what is that?
It's total maximum daily limits. A lot of communities are on ponds or on lakes or on water bodies that have a TMDL. And you can
Right.
only discharge so many pounds. So you multiply this concentration times 8.34 times the flow and you get pounds. If you exceed the number of pounds, you got a problem.
Right.
We're not on a basin that has done that yet.
Yeah, typically what'll happen is, and I might be wrong, waters are declared impaired waters because of the water quality issues, and then there might be a designation where they have the total maximum daily loads. And at times, if that happens, and that's a step-up kind of deal, if that happens, then there are structural and non-structural changes that entities may require, but I think that's a long way off.
Or fines.
But typically, they require best management practices of a structural or non-structural nature. Collier County had a big brouhaha about that recently, where they were talking about making structural requirements for best management practices to existing communities. But that's way down the road, and I guess if I may ask a question, Madam Chair, about, maybe, and I'm not a member of the board, but grab samples versus composite, is that something, can you explain what that means?
I'm gonna defer that to a water quality expert.
When you're going out and doing sampling, we would, like when Elle and I were doing it, we would go out with a, I don't know how many liter, half a liter?
Yes.
Half a liter bottle. We'd take a sample, we dipped it down, and that was it.
You
If
do
we
a
were
grab.
I'm sorry?
You
That's a
grab
grab.
sample.
That is a universal grab. If you were doing it on a composite sample, you would take and have a flow range of, let's say, 50 CFS to 100 CFS. And for that 50 CFS, you would grab a 1/4 liter. For 100 CFS, you'd grab a bigger one. In other words, it's a sliding scale. So the more the flow, the bigger the sample type thing, so that it's more representative of the impact. That gets into a lot of work to do that, and then you do it over a time period such that by the time you get all the data or the samples collected and tested, you get a representative blend instead of that one, what was in that bottle. Good example is if you're over on Weir 1 and you reach down and you happen to get a clump of solids. When you're sticking this down in the water 3 feet, it's hard to see what's down there. You could get a clump of solids that comes in there, and then when they run that sample, it just sends that thing through the roof. And it really wasn't a representative sample but you couldn't see it when you were collecting it, so.
However, we do take it to a very reputable sampler, and I think Ernesto would call me if I had a big clump of hydrilla or algae.
We were very, when we were doing this, we were very careful to,
Do not
Do not
disturb
do
the
that.
bottom, and not grab any particular algae, and to not grab any vegetation in the
don't put your
sample.
hands in the bottle and kind of wash them around.
Don't do that, we don't touch the inside of the bottles, we try to keep it as pure as possible.
But this is good information to give you an idea to the fact that the red is there is an indicator.
That's an indicator. And you're absolutely correct. We discharge into the 6 Mile Slough, into the 10 Mile Canal, and ultimately out to Estero Bay. None of these water bodies downstream of us have been declared impaired water bodies. If and when that happens, then we would be put on restrictions of our TMDLs, how much we can discharge on any given day.
And just the last question I have, Bill, is so we haven't been treating any of our water systems other than 83. That's the only pond that we've actually done some.
We did 83 with bacteria. We did that for several months. The water quality itself looked like it was a little bit better, but it was not helping the algae in any way.
But that's the only one that we proactively treated.
Right.
Okay.
Chemically treated.
Chemically
Yeah,
treated.
well, biological.
Or
Biologic.
Yeah.
treated period, we'll
It's-
use that.
It's,
term.
yes, they are biological and safe for the environment.
Okay, thank you.
So,
Thank you.
absolutely. Did anyone have some questions for Mr. De La Vega or Aquagenics?
Maybe ask Mr. De La Vega to come up and give his point.
Yeah.
And his perspective, and then hear from Aquagenics on their perspective, and also remedies they have, what they see, how they've addressed it.
Ernesto does a ton of these in the community or in the county. And just to try to get an idea of flavor of how do our numbers, again, realizing the graph, how do they compare with all the other communities on Pond Watch that come in and do the same thing?
And one input we're trying to get from this meeting today is the board put $35,000 of additional money for water quality sampling. So from some of the comments today, we're gonna be developing a enhanced sampling program to start that may include those composites and that additional effort in January.
Yeah, I'll be happy to answer any questions, but the effort of the communities, because we addressed that, it was so many ponds that we have to do this, otherwise it will be 20 samples from your community only, and I can only have so much room in my program. That's the reason why they grab samples and then if it's done by the same person in the same location, you can compare month after month throughout the whole year, and then we do a reasonable estimate. And it's not ultimately the final, but it's an indicator, it's a flag that tells us that something going on in this particular place. And if there's more need for investigation, then you send the samples to a certified lab, because we were certified, but we are not anymore because it's too much, it's too costly. So that certified lab can actually do this analysis and then put it into court if it's necessary. But for just this education and for investigation, this is perfectly fine.
That's your question. About comparison.
Yeah, Ernesto, I know you're doing a ton of these for communities all around with the Pond Watch. As far as the levels of the indicators for both phosphorus and the nitrites and nitrates, how do we compare with the other communities on our sampling?
Correct. Well, in fact, this spreadsheet is fantastic because the range that you see, the average range, is what most stormwater ponds in Southwest Florida should be. If you go above that, the red flag, that red number color, indicates that you are above the average stormwater pond concentration. And that's an indication in this case. So if you see a lot of those red in your area, you definitely are exceeding that normal range, normal average. And I will put a flag on that one, and I say something is there that is contributing to so much nutrients, and then the investigation should continue. Sometimes it's just seasonal. Like in the summers, you have a lot of runoff. You have a lot of leaf and particles that all run into that particular body of water, and it's happened to be before or after a rain event, that will influence the concentration that you have in that particular day. So again, this is just an indication, and overall, you compare pretty good to a lot of other communities, except for those flags again, who are just indicators.
Mr. Guy?
And as to, I try and read everything I can find about this problem statewide. And I know, or I think I know, that the governor and his team and the new South Florida Water Management folks are thinking about doing some very severe new regulations, as in closing off septic tanks and not letting farmers fertilize close to any body of water, et cetera, et cetera. Can you help me understand where we might be going in this area? You probably know a lot more than I do about it, but I don't think the governor and his bunch are gonna rest until this is taken care of.
That's true, and he has focused mostly on public bodies of water. These stormwater ponds that we have here, they're all private bodies of waters. And they eventually run into, like Ellie was saying, it goes eventually into a body of water that is public. So the government is concerned about mostly public waters that surrounded by activities that will affect it. Like in the Caloosahatchee, all the agriculture that goes into the Caloosahatchee, they have an impact in there. And then the governor is putting a lot of more monitoring now than it used to be. Now, so they're collecting more data, they're actually monitoring where the sources are coming. Same as urban wastewater, the septic tanks, there's a big influence. So it's not just agriculture, it's also the public use of waters, wastewaters. And so in communities that are surrounded, they're private, the impact eventually goes into that. I highly recommend that the sampling here, and I do that with most of my homeowners associations and gated communities, that they sample the last pond before it discharges into the next body of water or into another canal or something that goes, because they can prove how much is their impact as a community, how much is the impact. If they stay in the ranges and there's no flags coming up, that community is not contributing to the nutrients problems later on. And that's my goal in this program, is to try to make every community conscious about what they're doing so they don't pollute the rest of the environment. Now, where do you fit? Continuing this kind of a reporting and monitoring, that helps ultimately, because then you can actually track and we're finding where are the source of nutrient problems. And if you have that, then you can address that. So that's the whole spirit of this program.
I'd like to get ahead of the game on this so that we don't find ourselves on the outside looking in. If there's anything that it's obvious that we ought to be doing or not doing, I'd sure like to hear from you about it.
In fact, yeah. Yeah.
Has Lee County Health Department ever gotten with you to give you any indication into the number of septic tanks that this county has?
No, they have not.
So that's where the governor's gonna have a problem. We learned this in the Midwest about 40 years ago with the advent of EPA. Finding these communities with septic tanks is a no-brainer. We know who they are. We know where they are. The problem is,
But
you
we
have.
don't have them here in Gateway.
Oh, we don't have them in Gateway, but we got them all up and down the Caloosahatchee River, and the middle of this state is loaded with them. Your problem is, it's $20,000 per lot to fix it. Per lot to fix it, putting in sanitary sewers. That's where every time you get involved with septic tank runoff, it's easy to solve the problem. Where's the money coming from?
May I ask a question to the community? Are you going to be receiving reclaimed water? Are you planning on the receiving end of reclaimed water? Reclaimed water is a tertiary water that comes from the wastewater treatment
Every
plant.
drop of water coming out of that plant to the tune of about 2.75 million gallon a day comes to us.
And you're gonna be disposing of that water as a
That is our
irrigation?
entire, that's 50% of our entire irrigation system.
Let me warn you about something, which I may, because there have 3 communities, golf course communities, that are receiving that water from the wastewater treatment plant in Fort Myers. One is the oldest, and they get so much nutrients coming out of there, and they use it for irrigation. They are impacting their ponds so negatively that I highly recommend them to start addressing how much water they're buying, how much water they're using, and start implementing BMP, best management practice, in their ponds to reduce that. Because one of the main problems is this water is extremely low in high nutrients and phosphorus, nitrogen and phosphorus. And I see that because we collect that water and we see, and it always varies. Varies with the season, with the people, the population. It is a big, big problem that is coming. And how to fix this? By improving the wastewater, because that is the source of that water.
We have a gentleman that shows up at our meetings every once in a while, and his argument is we should be in wet season discharging that directly to our ponds coming out of the wastewater treatment plant.
Be cautious.
And we don't want to do that.
Be very, yeah.
So I have just a couple things. So when I'm just looking at this at a glance, what I'm trying to identify is the severity of the problem and if there's any trend. So what I'm looking at is, just at a glance, let's say anything that is in the red for 3 months is an indicator of an ongoing problem. There's quite a few that have spikes, or we can consider those out of control for 2-month duration. For example, if you look at Basin 1, for the orthophosphorus, July and August was peak at high control, but then September and October, it just dropped.
Correct.
So is that just due to flow, or is the kind of ecosystem kind of reconciling itself? There's a couple that I'm curious to see how the next 2 months flow, because I would imagine if you got 3 months to show what I consider, again, consistent out of control, you would need at least 2 months in the green to say that the problem's been resolved. And some of these are probably seasonal, which I understand. The only one that has more than 2 months of red is Lake 83, which is reasonable, right? So I almost take that one out of consideration. So again, trying to look at the severity, when I look at this at a glance, there is a lot of red, which identifies some level of issue, but I don't see month over month, over 2 months, where we have consistent red. So there is something happening to reconcile the high phosphorus issues. So when you look at this, at what level do you interpret this as being severity, and what impact does even 2 months have? I mean, imagine if it's phosphorus, you're going to get algae blooms for those 2 months, and then it's going to reconcile itself. So I want to make sure that we're accurately identifying the problem, so we can accurately identify, some type of maintenance or mitigation plan.
Correct. In fact, let me warn you about some of the numbers. If you look at the numbers that is in red, and you look at the highest of the average range, like for example, orthophosphorus for July is 0.02 or 0.020, okay, 0.02.
So that's right at the peak.
That is right on the edge, but that doesn't mean really that it's over, above, an extreme. And it's just a little flag, and there's the 0.055 that follows that. It is not so much a huge variation. We're not talking doubling the amount. I mean, it's like, well, yes, it is talking about doubling, but it goes down to, so that variation there is not like a big concern of mine.
So if I'm looking at this correctly, I'm paying attention to the phosphorus, because phosphorus could fuel
Correct.
the chloroform increase, and really what we're looking at is the algae growth, right?
Correct.
So first thing, I'd look at the phosphorus. If we're in the red, then I would go and see the impact to the chlorophyll. Is that a reasonable kind of path of kind of logic when you're looking at this?
Yeah, in reality, is the ratio of phosphorus and nitrogen is the one that's gonna affect the algae ultimately.
The combination of
Of
phosphorus
nitrogen and phosphorus, correct. There has to be a combination there. But phosphorus, if you have plenty nitrogen, which most of the times you do,
pre-existing.
yeah,
Yeah.
and then you have a little bit of the phosphorus, then it stimulates an algae bloom.
Well, there's another issue on 83, and we don't know the answer to that. But at the time the samples were collected in those months, at 83, remember we have 83's weir very high. If we were collecting the overflow, these may not be red because there was no sample. It's that we're taking the sample at the weir and there was no flow. So we're seeing, instead of a discharge overflow reading at these other locations, here we're taking a stagnant reading.
Stagnant water,
That's
yes,
the
correct,
difference.
and that will be a
That's a
completely
big
biased.
difference.
Yeah,
And
that
there's
makes sense.
very seldom ever flow out of Lake 83.
That is correct.
Very seldom.
Mrs. Flaherty?
Yes, I'm looking at basin 5, okay, where the chlorophyll A, I mean, when it was taken in June, it was right close to the 40. However, when we got down to September and October, it's 118.60 and 296.20. That to me, they're not even close to the normal, they're way high.
Way, yeah.
When do the rules allow the, or do the rules? I'm sorry.
Let Kathy
Okay, I thought I had an answer for her.
Oh, well, and I was just wondering what causes that and what we can do to stop that.
Trying to glance the previous numbers, because the,
Basin 5 is what I was getting ready to say. Basin 5 is the golf course down here at Gateway Greens. My guess is it could be impacted because the country club going into the fall starts really applying for all the seasonal members to make it look nice and pretty.
It's high.
All the chemicals.
Yeah.
And my guess is that's what you're seeing.
That makes sense.
remember what I said about the ratio phosphorus nitrogen? I think this is one of the events. If you notice that basin 5 in October, the number jumped from, it's not 0.1, which is the highest for the range, 0.1. So you have a red 0.275. So there is high numbers of phosphorus. If you have plenty nitrogen, if you add that phosphorus, that could trigger an algae bloom. And that could be the explanation of why you have an algae bloom that is completely went off the range. I mean, it's, yeah, 296 is a serious algae. That is yeah, a concern.
So do we?
But it could be that phosphorus, the presence of phosphorus has triggered that. That could be one of the explanations right there in our face.
So do we have to address that area, whatever they're doing in that area?
Depending on what type of algae. If you have algae that is toxic and is microcystis and blue-green algae, you have to be more concerned about that than if you just have regular chlorophyte algae that is non-toxic. So there's, depending on the type of algae, I will definitely will look into that. And sometimes we do that. We look at them and we analyze the type of algae just to warn the community about that.
Thank you.
We have between 1/2 and 3/4 of a mile of lakefront on the golf course influent to Weir 5. This is what I've been suggesting, arguing, as some might say, for years. Put the littorals on the golf course side, all the way down.
Use it as a filter.
That's the place to do it. There's your filter right there.
Most certainly.
There was another handout that we just,
Yeah.
Ernesto brought this in. He did this for us to show us, this is from Lake 83. Okay, stay here. You see how high the chlorophyll was? High, it stayed high, it stayed high. And then all of a sudden, 10/22, it dropped. Flavia has been taking a weekly sample, grab sample, to Ernesto since we put the nano bubbler aeration in.
Since you put in what, sorry?
It's called nano bubble aeration. It's micro bubbles. And
Is there a representative here from? Oh, yeah.
You mean it was
no,
this
they're
graphic?
pardon me?
You think these results are, it shows that it's that
It was
graphic?
it's night and day. It took about a month.
Jeez.
Am I
Yes.
correct, Flavia?
Yes.
It
The
took
water's
about
so
a month. The
clear.
water is crystal clear. The only the algae you still see in Lake 83 is clinging to the bottom.
Can you just describe that aeration? Is it one aerator?
It is one aerator that puts out a massive amount of tiny,
Small
tiny
bubble.
micro bubbles.
Tiny
Small,
bubbles?
small aeration.
Tiny,
That's the secret.
tiny. The tiny bubbles tend to, hey, it works, I know. If you would like, I'd be happy to send you all information on this unit,
Yes.
but
I'd like
the
to see
graph
it.
shows us it's working.
Can you visibly see it? Or-
Yes.
Yeah?
And I would like to add this too, because originally I was concerned, and I think with Ernesto too, with, the installation of the nano aerator, just because it seemed like it was a little bit higher, right? What the bubbles were discharging was almost on top of the surface, and that had something to do with the water level that went down. So looking at the results, which they're pretty good, but I do think we could have achieved better results if the company had gone back sooner and readjusted the height of the displacement of the bubbles.
When was the nano aerator? When was
Installed?
it installed?
Oh my gosh, it's been
August,
about a month
September?
and a half.
Yeah.
Who did it?
That would be Solitude Lake Management.
And what was the cost? What I'm trying to do is come up with a
$2
cost per
million.
acre.
I would, no.
What's the cost per acre?
Well,
Well, this was-
I don't have the exact numbers in front of me. Do you remember offhand?
I mean, 10,000, 20,000?
Oh, no, it was less than 10. I wanna say it was 7,000, but for
That'd
a
be 1,000.
year,
That's $1,000 an acre.
for a year. So break it down.
No, I'm talking about installation.
Oh, okay. It's a 6 surface
About
acres.
6 or 7, yeah.
Yeah,
And we put it in a month and a half ago?
yes, and it's made this difference for us.
It's pretty impressive.
So was that in October or at the end of September?
I can give you, if you give me 2 minutes, I'll tell you exactly the date, but I also.
Because I'm just curious, I wanna just kinda look here and see.
Was
Yeah,
that a
I'll
whole
tell you
new physical
exactly the date.
aerator?
Yes. But it's not a unit that stays in the pond forever and ever, like our small, units that we have with the diffusers on the bottom.
Yeah.
This is a big unit, sits this high. It's not much louder than the other units, but it cranks out, it's got an intake and an output, and it cranks out cranks the air into that pond.
What is it, a ceramic diffuser?
There's no diffuser, it's a big PVC pipe
Yeah.
blowing it back out into the pond.
We
And
own
no
that?
diffuser on the end?
There's no diffuser on the end.
And we own it, we bought it,
No, we do not buy.
but we're renting it
Yes,
at 7,000 for, what's the duration?
a year.
Is it 7,000 for the year or
Yes.
7,000?
I'm pretty sure it's for the year, yes.
Electric?
Not including the electric.
But it is electric.
It is
It's not
electric.
gas.
No, it's not gas. It is electric. We hooked it up to our, power supply.
How do you get it pumping air through a pipe, just keeps a great big bubble? How do you
Stop
get-
down there and look at it.
Yeah,
It
we'll
doesn't
look at
come
it.
out in a great big bubble. It is just blowing the bubbles
It's a
in the
diffuser.
air.
It's gotta be a
Alan,
diffuser.
will you send the information on that to the supervisors?
To the nano aeration? Yes, the date it was installed and how much it's costing.
That'd be great.
And there's only one?
One has
There's only one
83
unit, that's
units.
correct. But you can see the difference.
So a line goes off the unit out into the lake, and is it split, or is it just at one point of application?
It's just one point of application, but they spread out across the bottom of the pond.
How?
It's just the nature of the
Piping?
nano aeration.
Piping,
No,
or is
there's
it
not
blowing it
piping
out?
there. Let me send you the information.
Yeah.
Well, to add to that, the pond also has already aerators, normal
Yes.
diffusers, and it's all spread out, so this plume of micro bubbles are going and then gonna be mixed in there. We thought about it would be
Actually, I have a
just,
picture if you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
we thought it was gonna be localized, so we actually took samples in different locations, and that's the samples that you see in the two, the same day. It was in different locations to see how much it was the effect, so not just in the area where the plume of micro bubbles are going, so we went all around and took that sample as well.
Have you seen the same result in other ponds around the county?
You know, this is the first time I've seen this technology being applied, so that's the reason I jump in and said, send me the samples, I'll run them and then find out what's happening. And that's what we can provide it to the communities like, because I know it's expensive, the sampling is expensive, so just keep adding to us and then we'll do the analysis.
Any other questions for Ernesto? Thank you very much.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Beautiful black box.
Yes, Dr. Jennings, who's
Okay, also we have with us to talk about our water quality and the samples that they have taken, George Bowling and Will Ford with, Aquagenics.
Hello, gentlemen.
Yeah, good morning, or good afternoon, I should say. Yeah, I'm George Bowling with Aquagenics, and this is branch manager Will Ford, and he was participated in the sampling. So there's, over the last couple, 2-3 years that we've been doing the water samples, and they are sent out to a certified laboratory whenever we have taken them. So that's what we're getting is accurate information when we do that. Now, more often would probably be better, because again, we're getting, fluctuations when you go 1 year over a year period. So, right now, what we're looking at right now, and this, what they just brought up now, that's new technology that's out there on the market. Solitude does not own that technology, they've inherited that from somebody where they've brought them in. So, I mean, it's technology that's available out there and, so, but it hasn't been practiced very much yet, and this is an example of maybe it is a good product, it's very possible, so. But beyond that, we have, if we find that we have issues, and that lake has had issues for a long time, so if it does, it's a miracle, okay, that's great, I'm with it. But, there's many areas that you can start going down the list of areas that you can increase your monitoring of lakes. But a lot of times, the first thing we'll do is do a GIS mapping, which is gonna map the bottom of the lake and get all the soft sediment. Then you go in and take samples of that soft sediment in heavy areas. Then you take the samples and dissect them and get your organic, you wanna get your organic compounds that are in that area, which may be creating algae. And that contributes to chlorophyll and everything else that we have. So you can, this starts there, then you target the lakes that have these issues with potential solutions, such as, other aeration, maybe solar or electric or this nano type of aeration. You have live bacterias, which they tried some in that lake. It wasn't, there's a lot of different bacterias out there. That was not the bacteria that we recommended, but we use because manufacturers actually make their own bacterias. I mean, they actually create their own bacteria packets, and they have their own scientific formulas for that. So one guy can say, well, I tried bacteria. Well, it's not what we have. It's not the same stuff. So you have different results from using different stuff, and we've practiced this now for over 10 or 12 years with the bacteria. So bacteria is always good. You have bacteria that feeds in the water column, and you have bacteria, different style of bacteria that's dropped to the bottom and is just targeting the sediment and organic bottom in the bottom of the lake. So you have all these, different things that you can start with, and then there's also peroxides that are used regularly too, which are very, very effective in a lot of ways, but that was never tested on Lake 83 as well. But you have quick release peroxide and slow release peroxide, and the slow release peroxides are like a granular, and they last for months. They're expensive to put in, but in situations we've changed a lake completely, the composition of a lake over the matter of 2 or 3 years, between aeration, slow release peroxide, and live bacteria, to where we don't use copper sulfate at all hardly in these lakes anymore. So, we're reducing the algae potential there. So, aquatic plantings, Ed mentioned, they're good. Ed mentioned the kidney filters have been barren out on the golf course for years. And we did speak a few times between Al and myself and Ed and other people about, reestablishing all them planting areas, that does absorb some nutrients, so that's always a possibility. And beyond that, I go as far as I can put stormwater filters in the street in your street runoffs and filter nutrients that are running into your stormwater system. It gets a little expensive, yes, but I've got the high Cadillac of filters, and we use them in downtown Fort Myers. So, I mean, there's a whole list of services there and solutions to problems and that we have to pick from. So, you know, that would be our first thought in this process. And Will, if you wanna elaborate on any of the annual maintenance that we do or
Sure.
anything, you know.
Under the terms of our contract, you know, and Mr. Banks pointed this out, but one of the things is contractually, we only do the water testing once a year. So that doesn't set a very good baseline for doing an analysis across the board and really digging into the time of year that, you know, we're having the problems and the issues that we really need to address. So I think sharing that information with the Pond Watch group, you know, is gonna be, basically, you know, that's really what's gonna set the tone for which direction we take in identifying the issues and whether they're just seasonal or whether it's an issue with that lake that needs to be addressed. And, you know, like everyone's been iterating today, I mean, we don't wanna beat this to death. We've got information, but I think we're just starting to set the tone and analyze that data to identify what the problem areas are and what the potential solutions could be. I mean, there's a lot of solutions out there in the industry. It's just a matter of identifying exactly what the issues are before we attack them.
Questions?
I get several. George and Will, I know we're only doing the sampling of every pond once a year. These numbers are on the flowway. It seems to me that we might want to be, before we jump into anything, are there ponds upstream of any of these points that would be guilty of causing the problems? We have never done that. We've never isolated. We've gone to the flowway. We know what the flowway is. We've done it in, we did 4 or 5 years. But we had not gone upstream, save the one time a year. And I think time a year is you're really guessing if you're planning on using that data. So somehow, some way, I think we need to try to find out, are there contributory ponds that's causing the problem perhaps in the flowway? That's issue one. Second issue is, ask a question for L. Did I misunderstand you, because my wife says I have selective hearing? Was it mano or nano?
Nano.
It's nano, isn't
with
it?
an
Okay,
N.
now I feel better, because I thought I'd been out of business long enough that they slipped a new one in on me.
And just so you know, it was installed on September 20th of this year.
Okay. Question I have, George, do you will have anything in the way, 2 things I'm interested in any of this in new technology. What is the capital cost per acre, and what is the operation and maintenance cost per acre on an annual basis? Do you have any data on that, on this nanotechnology?
No, I don't. I mean, I know what they're talking about, but I mean, it's, yeah, on larger ponds, it's what, you know, it multiplies, you know.
But because before the meeting, we were talking about some of the aeration and some of the things that you guys have got new. One of our liabilities I'm worried about, and I know Bill and the Pelican people, in fact, I don't see any of them today.
Yeah, John,
But
sure.
one, yep. From their pond deal, this whole thing works if you got availability to power.
Yes, yes.
I dread thinking of dealing with FPL here on the Gateway side, of trying to get power to these sources. Now, you talked about the solar,
Yeah.
which may offer an alternative, but somehow, some way, we've got, I'm gonna guess what, Chris, 280 acres of water surface over here in the entirety of Gateway, not counting Pelican.
Yeah.
It's gotta be a phased project.
Yeah.
But to go aeration, we're talking, I had preliminarily guesstimated when we were doing the capital reserve, about 5,000-6,000 an acre.
Mhm.
And I don't have a clue, but I'm all ears if this other one can beat that number.
Yeah, I don't know, you know, again, it's very new, a lot of this, and it's only been tested at a few lakes around the county, I know that. And so, you know, and I will have the data for you down the road here pretty quick probably, but on the solar end of it, I can tell you this. I mean, I've done this over and over for people.
Save money.
If you go and buy electric systems, even something like that, that burns 24 hours a day, I can basically, solar will cost you more upfront, but it'll be paid for in 5 years, and then you got minor amount of money. So over the matter of 5, 10, 15, 20 years, I can save you like millions of dollars. Millions, literally.
But you
So-
pointed out the key is get those bathymetrics, get those samples.
Yeah.
To know that, do we have any collateral damage that's gonna come?
Yeah.
My fear here is that's years and years and years ago here in Gateway, copper sulfate was used a lot. And over the years, that stuff, we know where it's at right now,
Yeah.
it's on the bottom of these ponds.
It's trapped.
We start disturbing it and pulling that sediment out, I hate to even think of what is gonna happen, because a lot of places just won't take it. It's like a landfill, they won't take it.
No.
Which ends up, means you're
Stop.
taking it to some special waste district over south of Orlando, which costs a fortune to truck it.
Well, that's why we, you know, what we're speaking about here, like we said, if you do the GIS mapping, you find you find the denser areas, and you take samples of that, you find out what it is and how much how much of it's organic and not inorganic. And so then you can target that with these bacterias, and I mean, these bacterias will reduce by several inches a year. And with aeration, though, it needs that air, it needs to be oxygenated on the bottom as well, to keep everything alive and circulating, to make it, you know. So, but that would be kind of the steps that you go in, and then and one lake right over here may need nothing. I mean, you might not even have to worry about putting aeration in there for 5 or 10 years from now. You know, it's like, okay, it doesn't have a lot of nutrient in it, barely has any algae growth, you know, stays clear. You know, but then right across the street, you got one that's out of control, you know.
Mr. Banks?
Yeah, can you just help explain, so with 83, with the introduction of this nano aerator,